What was the last straw that made you give up on your parents? I was 22 when I found the folder. Not hidden exactly, just sitting in Dad's office filing cabinet between tax returns and insurance papers, a plain manila folder labeled Theo Medical. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from specialists at Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, all dated from when I was 7 to 12 years old, all recommending treatment for my severe ADHD and dyslexia, all ignored. There were teacher reports too. Mrs. Patterson from 3rd grade. Theo is clearly struggling. He's bright, but something is blocking him. Mr. Hendricks from 5th. Without intervention, Theo will continue to fall behind. My school counselor had written in red, "Urgent. This child needs help now." My hands shook as I read. I'd spent my entire childhood thinking I was stupid, lazy, a disappointment. My parents never mentioned any of this. Instead, Dad would yell about my grades while Mom sighed and said things like, "Why can't you just try harder?" I failed classes, got held back in 6th grade, spent lunch periods in detention for not finishing homework. My self-esteem was non-existent by high school. Teachers stopped calling on me. Other kids made jokes. I believed I deserved it. The folder also contained financial documents. The treatment would have cost $3,200 total. Our insurance covered 80%. That same year, according to the bank statements also in the folder, my parents spent $18,000 renovating the kitchen. They bought a boat for $31,000. Dad got hair plugs for $6,400, but $640 for their son's learning disability treatment? Too expensive, apparently. I sat there reading until 2 a.m. The final letter was from Dr. Patricia Osborne, a pediatric neurologist. She'd written, "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, your son's conditions are highly treatable. Children who receive early intervention go on to succeed in college and careers. Without it, Theo faces a lifetime of struggle. Please reconsider." They never responded. I'd discovered the folder by accident. Dad had asked me to find his passport for an upcoming cruise to Alaska, their 4th cruise in 2 years. Meanwhile, I was living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, working overnight shifts stocking shelves because no college would accept me with my transcripts. I confronted them the next morning, brought the entire folder. Mom's face went pale. Dad got defensive immediately. "We made the best decision we could at the time," he said. "Those doctors just wanted money. Everyone's got ADHD these days. It's overdiagnosed." "I failed 9th grade twice," I said quietly. "I dropped out at 17 because I thought I was too stupid for school." "You just didn't apply yourself," Mom insisted. "Medication would have just made you dependent." "I was 7 years old," my voice cracked. "I needed help, and you chose a boat." Dad stood up. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. Your grandfather was sick. The business was struggling. You bought a boat," I repeated. "Hair plugs, a kitchen remodel." Silence. "We did our best," Mom finally whispered. "Your best was reading those letters and deciding I wasn't worth it." I left that morning, took the folder with me, called Dr. Osborne's office, though she'd retired 3 years prior. Her replacement, Dr. Raymond Chen, saw me within a week after I explained everything. He ran tests, so many tests. "Your dyslexia is severe," he said gently, "and your ADHD is textbook, both highly manageable with treatment. The earlier you'd started, the better, but it's never too late." He connected me with a reading specialist named Colette, who changed everything. Within 6 months, I was reading at a normal level. Within a year, I'd gotten my GED and enrolled in community college. I'm finishing my associate's degree next semester with a 3.8 GPA. My parents called last week. They're downsizing, selling the house, found some boxes of my childhood things in the attic. There's something they need to tell me about those medical letters I'd found. Apparently there's more. Another folder I didn't see. And what's inside changes everything I thought I knew about why they really refused treatment. I didn't want to go back to that house. Hadn't been there in 3 years. Not since the morning I walked out with the first folder. But Mom's voice on the phone had this quality I'd never heard before. Not defensive, not dismissive, scared. "Please, Theo," she'd said. "You need to see this before we sell, before we throw anything away." Dad hadn't said a word. I could hear him breathing in the background, but he stayed silent the entire call. I drove over on a Saturday morning. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The boat was gone from the driveway. So was Dad's BMW. In their places sat 2 modest sedans, both at least 10 years old. Mom answered the door. She'd aged, really aged. Her hair had gone completely gray, and she'd stopped dyeing it. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans from Target. She looked like someone's grandmother, not the woman who'd spent $400 on a single purse while I wore shoes with holes in them. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. The inside of the house shocked me more. The renovated kitchen they'd spent $18,000 on, now outdated, cabinets hanging slightly crooked. The living room furniture I remembered being replaced every few years. Same couches from my childhood, worn and sagging. Even the carpet looked original, stained and threadbare in the high traffic areas. Dad sat at the kitchen table. He didn't stand up when I walked in, didn't offer a handshake or any greeting. He just stared at his hands, fingers interlaced on the table like he was praying. "It's in the office," Mom said. Same cabinet. I walked down the familiar hallway. Dad's office looked like it had been ransacked. Boxes everywhere, papers stacked in piles, filing cabinet drawers hanging open. On his desk sat another manila folder. This one was thicker, labeled Theo Trust Fund. My stomach dropped. I opened it with shaking hands. The first document was a letter from my grandfather's estate attorney, dated 6 months before I was born. It detailed a trust fund my grandfather had established for his future grandson, $1 million to be held in trust until I turned 25, with provisions for educational and medical expenses to be withdrawn as needed with proper documentation. $1 million. For me. I kept reading. There were withdrawal forms, dozens of them, all denied. Every single request my parents had made to access the trust for my treatment had been rejected by the trustee. But why? I flipped through more pages, found a letter from the trustee, a lawyer named Donald Voss with a firm in Philadelphia. It was dated 8 months after Dr. Osborne's first letter. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, as I have explained multiple times, the trust cannot be accessed for treatments of learning disabilities or psychological conditions. Your father's instructions were explicit. The trust fund is for serious medical conditions only. Cancer, organ failure, catastrophic accidents, not behavioral issues or school problems. These conditions are specifically excluded under Section 4, Paragraph B of the trust document. I sat down hard in Dad's office chair. My grandfather hadn't just left me money, he'd left me a fortune, but he'd tied it up so tightly that it couldn't help me with the one thing I actually needed. There were more letters. My parents had tried, really tried. They'd appealed to Donald Voss 17 times over 5 years. They'd provided documentation from specialists, letters from teachers, academic records showing my decline. They'd argued that untreated ADHD and dyslexia would cause catastrophic damage to my future. Every appeal was denied. The final letter from Voss was brutal. The trust terms are non-negotiable. Your father was very clear about his views on mental health and learning disorders. He did not consider them legitimate medical conditions. If you cannot afford treatment through your own means, that is unfortunate, but the trust cannot be modified. I found financial records next. My parents' bank statements from those years. They hadn't lied about the business struggling. Dad's construction company had nearly gone bankrupt in 2008. They'd remortgaged the house twice. Mom had maxed out credit cards just to keep groceries on the table. The boat, leased, then repossessed after 6 months. The kitchen renovation, done by Dad's crew using leftover materials from canceled jobs, a desperate attempt to add value to the house before the bank foreclosed. The hair plugs, paid for by cashing out Dad's life insurance policy early at a massive penalty because he thought looking younger might help him win contracts. They'd been drowning, and they couldn't touch $1 million sitting in a trust for their son because my grandfather, the man I'd never met, had decided learning disabilities weren't real medical problems. I found my grandfather's actual trust document at the bottom of the folder. It was 47 pages of legal language, but Section 4, Paragraph B was highlighted in yellow. Excluded conditions include but are not limited to psychiatric disorders, learning disabilities, developmental delays, behavioral issues, attention deficit conditions, and any diagnosis that requires psychological treatment or evaluation. The trustee shall have sole discretion to determine what constitutes a serious medical condition worthy of early withdrawal. There was a handwritten note stapled to the back page in my grandfather's writing. Too many kids these days are coddled, given excuses, medicated because parents are weak. My grandson will be tough. If he can't handle school, he'll learn to work with his hands like I did. Real men don't need pills to pay attention. I couldn't breathe. My entire childhood ruined by a dead man's ignorance. I heard footsteps behind me. Dad stood in the doorway. We tried, he said. His voice cracked. We tried so many times. The boat, I said numbly. The kitchen, were lies, he finished. We were lying to everyone, including ourselves, trying to look successful when we were falling apart. The boat lasted 6 months before they took it. The kitchen was a patch job, the hair plugs. He touched his head self-consciously. I thought if I looked younger, more vital, I could save the business. It didn't work. We lost everything anyway. Mom appeared beside him. We couldn't tell you about the trust. You were 7 years old. How do you explain to a child that his grandfather left him a fortune, but won't let him use it to read? You let me think I was worthless, I said. You let me believe I was stupid. We were ashamed, Mom whispered. Ashamed we couldn't afford $640. Ashamed we had to watch you struggle while $1 million sat in a bank account we couldn't touch. So we lied. We pretended the doctors were wrong, that you just needed to try harder, because admitting the truth meant admitting we were failures. Dad walked to the desk, picked up another document. This came last month, from Donald Voss's office. It was a letter informing them that I would gain full access to the trust on my 25th birthday, now just 8 months away. The balance had grown to $1.4 million with interest and investments. We're not asking for forgiveness, Dad said. We're not asking for anything. We just wanted you to know the truth before that money becomes yours, so you'd understand. I looked at them both. Mom's gray hair, Dad's stooped shoulders, the shabby house falling apart around them. Where did you really spend your money? I asked. They looked at each other. Finally, Mom spoke. Your grandfather's care. He had dementia the last 3 years of his life. The good facilities cost $15,000 a month. Insurance covered some, but not enough. He'd cut your dad out of his will except for establishing your trust, but we couldn't just let him rot in a state facility. We spent nearly $300,000 on his care, Dad said. Burned through our savings, our retirement, everything, for a man who made sure we couldn't help our own son, because he was still my father. I sat there holding the folder, trying to process it all. Why didn't you tell me this 3 years ago? when I confronted you. Pride, Dad admitted, and shame. We'd spent decades lying about why we couldn't help you. The truth was worse than the lie. We'd chosen my father's comfort over your treatment because we couldn't stand the idea of him dying alone in a terrible place, even after what he'd done. Mom wiped her eyes. We thought if we just kept pretending it was about the money, about priorities, you'd hate us, but you wouldn't have to know about the trust. Wouldn't have to know your own grandfather had valued you so little. You should have told me, I said. You're right, Dad said. We should have done a lot of things differently. I looked at the trust document again, at my grandfather's note, at the letters from Donald Voss, coldly denying every appeal. I want to meet him, I said. This trustee, Voss, he's retired, Mom said. But his son took over the firm, Donald Voss Jr. Set up a meeting, Donald Voss Jr. His office was in Center City, Philadelphia, on the 43rd floor of a building that screamed old money. The receptionist made me wait 30 minutes despite having an appointment. Power play. When I finally got into his office, Voss Jr. looked exactly like I'd imagined. Mid-50s, silver hair, suit that probably cost more than my car. He had the same expression his father had in the photo on his desk, the look of someone who'd never struggled for anything and couldn't imagine why anyone else would. Mr. Brennan, he said, not standing. I understand you have questions about your trust. Questions, I repeated. That's one word for it. He gestured to a chair. I stayed standing. Your father made 17 appeals to have the trust accessed for my treatment, I said. Your father denied every single one. The trust terms were very specific. The trust terms were written by a man who thought learning disabilities weren't real. Voss Jr. shifted in his chair. My father was obligated to follow the grantor's instructions. That's how trusts work. We don't get to apply modern medical understanding to documents written decades ago. My grandfather died in 2011. These appeals were made starting in 2007. ADHD and dyslexia were well-recognized medical conditions by then. Recognized, perhaps, but not covered under the trust terms. I pulled out a copy of the trust document. Section 4. Paragraph B says the trustee has sole discretion to determine serious medical condition. Your father could have approved the withdrawals. He chose not to. He was following his interpretation of the grantor's intent. His interpretation ruined my childhood. Voss Jr. stood up now. Mr. Brennan, I understand you're upset, but trust law is complex. My father acted within his legal rights and obligations. If you're considering legal action, I should tell you that any attorney will advise you that the statute of limitations has long passed. You gain access to the trust in 8 months. I suggest you accept that and move forward. I'm not here to sue you, I said. That caught him off guard. Then why are you here? I want to see the full trust documents. Every page, every amendment, every piece of correspondence between your father and my grandfather. That's all confidential. I'm the beneficiary. I have a right to see the complete trust file. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he pressed a button on his desk. Helen, bring in the Brennan trust file. Complete documentation. 20 minutes later, I sat at his conference table with a box of documents. Voss Jr. left me alone, probably hoping I'd get bored and leave. Instead, I read every single page. What I found made my blood run cold. There were emails, dozens of them, between Donald Voss Sr. and my grandfather, dated from 2006 to 2010, before my grandfather's dementia got bad. They weren't just discussing trust terms, they were scheming. Donald, the boy is showing signs of weakness. Teachers say he's struggling. If my son uses this trust money for psychological coddling, he'll raise another soft generation. Make sure the terms are ironclad. Real medical emergencies only. Break a leg, we'll pay for the hospital. Can't sit still in class? That's a parenting problem, not a medical one. Robert, I've drafted an amendment that will make it nearly impossible to access the funds for anything behavioral or psychological. I'm also recommending we add a clause about trustee discretion that gives me final say on what constitutes legitimate need. This will prevent your son from making appeals to another firm or court. Donald, perfect. One more thing. If the boy turns out worthless, unable to manage money because he's too stupid to get through school, I want provisions that allow the trust to be dissolved and funds donated to real causes. Kids today are given too many excuses. If mine can't make something of himself without pills and therapy, he doesn't deserve the money. Robert, I found the amendment they'd discussed. It had been added to the trust in 2008, right after my parents' first appeal. It contained a clause I hadn't seen in the original document. If the beneficiary fails to achieve specific milestones by age 25, completion of high school diploma or equivalent, gainful employment for at least 12 consecutive months, no criminal record, the trustee may recommend dissolution of the trust with funds to be donated to charities of the grantor's choosing. My grandfather had added a poison pill, a way to take away the money if I turned out to be too much of a failure. I kept reading, found correspondence from after my grandfather died. Donald Voss Sr. had written to my parents, I'm aware your son dropped out of high school. Under the amended terms, this may affect his ability to access the trust at 25. I will be monitoring his progress. Should he fail to meet the milestones established by his grandfather, I will have no choice but to recommend dissolution. My parents had never told me about this. They couldn't. Because telling me would mean admitting that if I didn't turn my life around, I'd lose the money entirely. The final document in the box was dated 6 months ago. A letter from Donald Voss Jr. to my parents. I've reviewed Theodore's records. Despite his unconventional path, he has obtained his GED and maintained continuous employment for over 3 years. He's also enrolled in community college with an impressive GPA. While my father might have questioned whether this meets the spirit of the milestones, I believe it satisfies the letter of the law. The trust will be transferred to Theodore on his 25th birthday without conditions. Voss Jr. had saved the trust. He could have argued I didn't meet the requirements, no traditional high school diploma, gaps in employment, years of struggling. Instead, he'd chosen to interpret the terms in my favor. I walked back to his office. He was on a phone call but held up a finger, wrapped it up quickly. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked. "Your father and my grandfather conspired to make sure I'd fail," I said. He didn't deny it. "I found those emails when I took over the firm. My father had very specific views about discipline and weakness. I didn't share them. You could have dissolved the trust 6 months ago." "I could have," he agreed, "but I read your records, saw what you'd overcome."
My father would have called you a failure. I call you resilient. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a photograph. A young man, maybe 17, smiling at the camera. "My son," he said. "He has severe dyslexia and ADHD, diagnosed at 8. We got him treatment immediately. Medication, tutors, specialists. He graduated high school with a 3.2 GPA and just finished his first year at Temple." He put the photo back carefully.
"When I read your file, I saw what would have happened to my son if we'd listened to my father instead of the doctors. So, no, I wasn't going to dissolve your trust because you took a different path than your grandfather demanded. You survived despite 2 generations of men who didn't believe your struggles were real." I didn't know what to say. "The trust transfers in 8 months, he continued. "I've already started the paperwork. You'll get every penny, plus accumulated interest, $1, $4 million as my letter stated." "What would your father have done?" I asked. "Found a reason to dissolve it. Donated the money to some veterans charity or business association. He always believed struggling was a choice." I looked at the box of documents still sitting in his conference room. "Can I get copies of everything? The emails, the amendment, all of it?" "Already prepared." He handed me a thumb drive. "Complete documentation. Do with it what you will." I took it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm just not repeating my father's mistakes." I drove back to my apartment in a daze. $1.4 million in 8 months. Money that was supposed to help me as a child, but had been weaponized to punish me instead. I plugged in the thumb drive and read everything again. The emails were worse the second time. My grandfather's contempt for weakness. Donald Voss Sr.'s clinical cruelty in crafting terms that would trap my parents in an impossible situation. The amendment designed to take away the money if I failed to meet arbitrary standards of success. But there was something else in the files, something I'd almost missed. A letter from my grandfather to Voss Sr. dated 2009. "Donald, my son came to me today, begged me to modify the trust, let them use some money for the boy's treatment. Actually had tears in his eyes. I told him no. If he can't afford to raise his child properly, that's his failure, not my responsibility. The trust is for emergencies, real emergencies. If the boy breaks his leg, we'll pay for the hospital. If he needs pills because he can't sit still, that's a discipline problem." My son asked how I could watch my grandson struggle. I told him the same thing my father told me. Struggling builds character. The boy will either figure out how to succeed despite his problems, or he'll learn he's not cut out for success. Either way, he'll be stronger for it. These modern doctors just want to medicate everyone, make money off worried parents. I'm leaving the trust alone. Let's see what the boy's made of without pills and excuses. If he amounts to anything, he'll have access at 25. If not, the money will go to people who deserve it. Robert, my father had begged, had cried, and his own father had said no. I called my parents. Dad answered. "I met with Voss Jr., I said. Found the emails. Silence on the other end. "You went to grandfather. Asked him directly to help." 3 times, Dad said quietly. "The first time he laughed at me, said I was raising you soft. The second time he got angry, told me I was a failure as a father if I needed to medicate my son to make him behave. The third time, he paused. The third time he told me if I asked again, he'd cut me out entirely. Make sure I didn't get a penny when he died. He'd already cut you out," I said. "I know, but your mom and I kept hoping. We kept thinking he'd change his mind. Leave us something. We were so broke, Theo, so desperate. The house was going into foreclosure. The business was dying. We thought if we could just hold on, if you could just push through school, maybe when he died there'd be something for all of us. So you didn't push for my treatment because you were afraid he'd punish you financially. That's part of it," he admitted. "But mostly we tried everything to access the trust legally, failed, and couldn't afford treatment ourselves. Your grandfather was the only other option, and he'd made his position clear. We were trapped, and we were too proud to admit it to you. You could have told me the truth. You were a child. How do you tell a child that his grandfather thinks he's weak? That there's $1 million with his name on it that he can't use because the man who left it to him thought his problems weren't real?" I didn't have an answer for that. Voss Jr. said the trust transfers in 8 months. $1.4 million. I'll have full access. "We know." Mom's voice joined in. They were on speakerphone. "We got the same letter." "The house," I said. "You're selling it because you're broke." "We're selling it because we can't afford to keep it," Mom said. "But also because staying here," she trailed off. "Every room reminds us of the choices we made, the lies we told. We're moving to a small condo, starting over. With what money?" Another pause. "We don't have much," Dad said. "We'll figure it out." I spent the next 3 months finishing my associate's degree. Colette, my reading specialist, threw me a small graduation party. Dr. Chen came, along with a few people from my community college classes. My parents weren't invited. I still wasn't ready for that, but I kept thinking about those emails, about my father begging his own father for help and being told he was raising me soft, about the business failing, the house nearly foreclosing, and still paying $15,000 a month to keep my grandfather in a decent memory care facility. I did the math. 3 years of care at $15,000 monthly was $540,000, plus whatever the insurance didn't cover for his other medical needs. They'd spent over $600,000 keeping my grandfather comfortable while he had dementia. while his trust documents sat in a lawyer's office, ensuring they couldn't access a penny to help their struggling child. One night, I drove past their house. There was a sold sign out front. I sat in my car across the street watching the windows. The lights were still on. I could see Mom packing boxes in what used to be the living room. I pulled out my phone, looked at my bank account. Between work and student loans I'd taken for community college, I had about $8,000. My apartment was $650 a month. My car was paid off but needed new tires soon. I was doing okay, getting by. In 8 months, I'd have $1.4 million. Money that could have changed my childhood, given me the treatment I needed at 7 instead of 22, saved me from years of thinking I was worthless. But my parents had tried to get it for me, really tried, and my grandfather had punished them for even asking. I called them. Dad answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting by the phone. "Where are you moving?" I asked. "A small place in Wilmington, 2-bedroom. It's all we can afford right now. Send me the address." "Theo, just send it." He did. I looked it up on my phone. It was in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where you hear sirens at night, the kind of place I'd lived in when I was working overnight shifts at the warehouse. "How much did the house sell for?" I asked. "After paying off what we owed, we'll walk away with about $30,000. It'll cover the first year's rent and give us a small cushion. And then we work. Mom's going to try to find something part-time. I'm looking at warehouse jobs, maybe overnight security. We'll manage." My dad, who'd owned a construction company, was looking at overnight security. My mom, who'd once had a closet full of designer clothes, was going to work part-time because they'd spent everything they had keeping my grandfather comfortable, the same man who'd ensured I'd suffer. "I get access to the trust in 5 months, I said, August 15th. "We know. I'm going to need time to decide what to do with it." "We're not asking for anything," Dad said quickly. "That money is yours. Your grandfather left it for you, however twisted his conditions were. You do whatever you want with it." "I know," I said. "I just wanted you to know I'm thinking about it." I hung up before he could respond. The next 5 months were strange. I transferred to a 4-year university for the fall semester, majoring in education. I wanted to be a special ed teacher, wanted to help kids like me, the ones who struggled not because they were lazy, but because their brains worked differently. My parents called once a week, short calls, checking in. They didn't ask about the trust, didn't mention money, mostly just asked how school was going, if I was eating enough, basic parent things. It felt hollow, like we were playing at being a normal family when we all knew we weren't. I went to therapy. My insurance through the university covered it. Dr. Wilson was patient, let me work through everything at my own pace. The anger at my parents, the rage at my grandfather, the grief for the childhood I didn't have. "You're allowed to be angry," she said during one session. "What happened to you was neglect, even if it was complicated neglect." "They tried, though," I said. "They appealed 17 times, begged my grandfather. They just couldn't afford it themselves." "And why couldn't they afford it?" "The business was struggling. They spent $600,000 on your grandfather's care," she interrupted gently. "The man who ensured you'd suffer. They chose him over you. He was dying. He had dementia. They couldn't just leave him." "Couldn't they?" she asked. "There were state facilities, Medicaid options. They could have put him somewhere cheaper and used some of that money for your treatment. They chose not to." I thought about that. Late at night, when I couldn't sleep. My parents had sacrificed my treatment to give my grandfather dignity in death. The same grandfather who'd written that struggling builds character and refused to modify the trust even when his own son begged him. Was that love? Obligation? Guilt? I didn't know. Maybe all three. My birthday approached, August 15th, the day I'd turn 25 and gain access to the trust. Donald Voss Jr. called me 2 weeks before. "Everything's ready. On the 15th, the trust transfers to an account in your name. I'll need you to come to the office to sign final paperwork." "What happens if I refuse it?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Refuse it? Don't sign. Don't take the money. Then it sits in limbo until you do sign." "There's no provision for refusal in the trust terms. Your grandfather never imagined someone would turn down $1.4 million. What if I sign it over to someone else immediately? It's your money once you sign. You can do whatever you want with it. But Mr. Brennan, can I speak freely? Go ahead. Don't make a decision based on anger at your grandfather. Don't punish yourself because you're mad at him. That money is yours. You earned it by surviving everything he put you through. I didn't earn it. It was just given to me by genetic lottery. Right place, right family, even if that family was terrible. Then use it to help other kids in your situation. Start a foundation, fund treatment programs, but don't reject it because you feel guilty about having it." After we hung up, I sat with that. The idea of starting something, using the money to help other kids whose parents couldn't afford treatment, kids whose grandparents thought struggling built character. But there was something else I needed to do first. August 15th was a Wednesday. I got to Voss Jr.'s office at 10 a.m. He had all the paperwork ready. Signature pages, account information, tax documentation. The trust had been managed well. The $1 million had grown to $1,537,000 with interest and careful investments. "Before I sign," I said, "I need to know something. Your father, did he ever express regret about how he handled the trust?" Voss Jr. set down his pen. My father was a complicated man. He believed in rules, in following the letter of the law even when the spirit might suggest otherwise. But no, I don't think he regretted his decisions. He thought he was doing the right thing, protecting the grantor's intent. Even though it hurt me, he would have said it made you stronger, that you succeeded without the money, which proved your grandfather was right about struggling building character. He paused. "I disagree with that philosophy entirely," for what it's worth. I signed the papers, watched as $1,137,000 was transferred into an account with my name on it. It took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to gain access to money that could have changed everything if I'd had it 15 years earlier. What will you do with it? Voss Jr. asked as I stood to leave. I'm not sure yet, I said, but I have some ideas. I drove to my parents' new apartment in Wilmington. It was worse in person than it had looked online. The building was run down, graffiti on the walls, bars on the first floor windows. Their unit was on the third floor. The elevator was broken. I took the stairs. Dad answered when I knocked. He looked exhausted, older than his 60 years. He was wearing a security guard uniform, night shift. He'd probably just gotten home. Theo, he said, surprised. Everything okay? Can I come in? The apartment was tiny. A small living room with a kitchen alcove, 2 bedrooms barely big enough for beds. The furniture was a mix of secondhand pieces and items I remembered from the old house, now shabby and worn. Mom sat on the couch, watching TV. She stood up when she saw me, nervous. I signed the papers today, I said. The trust is now in my account. They both nodded, didn't ask how much, though they probably knew from Voss Jr.'s letter. I've been thinking about what to do with it, I continued. About whether I should give you anything after everything that happened. Mom's face crumpled. Theo, we don't expect— Let me finish, I said. I read all the emails. Between grandfather and Voss Sr., I read the amendment they created to try to take the money away if I didn't meet their standards of success. I read the letter where grandfather called you a failure for asking him to help me. Dad sat down heavily on a kitchen chair. I know you spent over $600,000 on his care, while he was making sure I couldn't get treatment, while his trust document sat there ensuring you couldn't help me even though you tried. He was still my father, Dad said quietly, even after everything. I know, and you chose him over me. You could have put him in a state facility, used some of that money for my treatment, but you didn't. Mom started crying, silent tears running down her face. So here's what I'm going to do, I said. I'm going to start a foundation for kids with learning disabilities whose families can't afford treatment. I'm putting $500,000 into it initially. It'll be called the Patricia Osborne Foundation, after the doctor who tried to help me. Dad looked up. That's good, Theo. That's really good. I'm also paying off my student loans and setting aside money to finish my bachelor's and get a teaching credential. That's another $100,000 or so. They nodded. And I'm keeping $500,000 for myself. Emergency fund, future house, retirement, security. You should, Mom said. You deserve security. That leaves about $337,000, I continued. And here's the thing. I'm still angry. I don't know if I'll ever not be angry about what happened to me, about the choices you made. But I also know you tried. Within the constraints you set for yourselves, you tried to help me. I pulled out a check I'd written before coming over. This is for you. It's not forgiveness. I'm not sure I can forgive what happened, but it's acknowledgement that you were trapped too. Different from how I was trapped, but trapped nonetheless. The check was for $337,000, everything left after my other allocation. Dad stared at it. Theo, we can't— You can, I said. Use it to retire. Get out of this place. Get somewhere safe. Mom can stop working. You can stop doing night shifts. Just take it. This is your grandfather's money, Mom said. He would have hated this. Hated knowing we got anything. I know, I said. That's why I'm doing it. Grandfather designed that trust to punish failure and reward success by his narrow definition. He would have considered me a failure because I didn't finish traditional high school, would have dissolved the trust if he could have, and he would have been furious that you ended up with any of his money after you failed as parents. I stood up to leave, so yeah, this is partly for you, but it's mostly for spite. Every dollar you spend is a middle finger to a dead man who thought struggling built character and refused to help a 7-year-old learn to read. I didn't see my parents for 3 months after that. They called once to say thank you, to say they'd found a nice house in a quiet neighborhood in Delaware. They were getting out of Wilmington. Dad was going to retire. Mom was looking at part-time volunteer work at a literacy center, which felt appropriate. The Patricia Osborne Foundation launched in November. I worked with lawyers to set it up properly, hired an administrator, started reaching out to schools and clinics. We funded treatment for our first 5 kids in January. Every one of them got comprehensive testing, treatment plans, tutoring, medication if needed. Everything I should have had at 7. I met the families, heard their stories. Parents working 3 jobs who couldn't afford $3,000 for evaluations. Single mothers who'd been told their son just needed more discipline. Fathers who thought ADHD was just an excuse for laziness until they saw their daughter transform with proper treatment. In February, I got a letter from one of the mothers. Her son had been failing 3rd grade, getting in trouble constantly, falling further behind. After 6 months of treatment funded by the foundation, he was reading at grade level and staying in his seat. She'd included a picture. The kid was grinning, holding a book, looking proud. I put the picture on my refrigerator, added more as other families sent them. Within a year, I had dozens. Kids who'd been struggling, now thriving, all because they got help early instead of spending their childhood thinking they were stupid. My parents invited me to their new house for Thanksgiving. I almost didn't go, but Colette, my reading specialist, convinced me. You don't have to forgive them, she said, but you should see what you gave them, how your choice affected their lives. The house was small but nice. Quiet neighborhood, big yard, newer construction. Mom had a garden. Dad had a workshop in the garage. They looked different, rested, younger somehow, even though they were older. We ate dinner, made small talk. It was awkward, stilted. We were strangers trying to pretend we weren't. After dinner, Dad took me out to his workshop. He was building something, a wooden toy box, intricate carvings on the side. For my future grandkids, he said, if you ever have any, if you ever want us to meet them. I ran my hand over the carving. It was beautiful. The kind of craftsmanship he used to do before the business failed, before everything fell apart. I don't know if I want kids, I said honestly. That's okay. If you don't, I'll donate it to the foundation, for one of the families you help. We stood there in silence for a while. I'm sorry, he said finally, for all of it, for the choices we made, for not being stronger, for not choosing you over my father. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that everything you've built, the foundation, your education, helping those kids, you did that despite us. Despite your grandfather. You're better than we were. I had help, I said. Dr. Chen, Colette, people who saw me struggling and actually helped. We should have been those people, he said. We should have fought harder, fought differently, put you first. I didn't argue with that. It was true. The money, he continued. We're not spending much of it. We bought this house, set up a retirement account. But the rest, he pulled out a folder. Inside were financial documents. We want to donate it to the foundation. Match what you put in. Another $500,000. I stared at the papers. That's most of what I gave you. It's not ours, Mom said from the doorway. It never was. That money came from my father-in-law, the man who hurt you. It doesn't feel right keeping it. We have enough now. A house, security, retirement accounts. We don't need more. The foundation will help more kids, Dad finished. Kids like you. That feels right. That feels like taking something terrible and making it good. I took the folder, looked at the donation paperwork they'd already had drawn up. Okay, I said, I'll accept this, but on one condition. What? The foundation will send you updates, pictures of the kids we help, their progress reports, their success stories. You'll see exactly where this money goes, what it does, all the kids who won't have to struggle like I did. Mom started crying. That's not punishment enough. It's not punishment, I said. It's education. You'll see what proper treatment does, what those doctors were talking about in all those letters. What could have happened if grandfather had been a different person? 5 years later, the Patricia Osborne Foundation has helped 214 kids. Some needed ADHD medication, others needed dyslexia therapy, a few needed autism support services. All of them needed help their families couldn't afford. I'm teaching now. Special education at a middle school in Philadelphia. I see kids every day who remind me of myself at that age. Struggling, frustrated, starting to believe they're stupid. I pull them aside, tell them about my story, get them tested, connect their families with resources. Sometimes I can help through the foundation. Sometimes their insurance covers it. Sometimes we find other grants and programs. But one way or another, I make sure they get help. None of them will spend their childhood thinking they're worthless. My parents volunteer at the foundation now. Mom does administrative work. Dad helps with fundraising. They see every kid we help. Read every progress report. Attend the annual celebration where families share their stories. Last year, a father stood up and talked about his daughter, how she'd been failing school, getting in trouble, starting to give up, how the foundation funded her treatment, how she was now on the honor roll, smiling again, believing in herself. You saved her life, the father said, looking at me. Our family will never forget this. I saw my parents in the audience. Mom was crying. Dad had his arm around her. They were looking at me with something like pride, but also something like grief, recognition of what they'd failed to do for their own child, reflected in what I was now doing for others. We're not close. We probably never will be. Too much damage, too many years of struggle, but we're something. Some version of a family, built on acknowledgement rather than forgiveness. I still have the original folder, the one with all the medical letters, the denied appeals, the evidence of my grandfather's cruelty. I keep it in my office at school. Sometimes I show it to parents who are hesitant about getting their kids tested, who think ADHD is overdiagnosed or learning disabilities are just excuses. This is what happens when you ignore it, I tell them. This is what it costs. Usually that's enough. Usually they agree to the testing. My grandfather wanted to build character through struggle. He thought withholding help would make me stronger. In a twisted way, he was right. I am strong, resilient, determined, but not because of the struggle, because I survived it. And now I'm making sure other kids don't have to. The trust was worth $1.4 million. Between my donation and my parents, the foundation started with $1 million. With additional fundraising, we now have $2.3 million in assets. We help 40 to 50 kids per year. Every time we send out an acceptance letter to a family, I think about 7-year-old me, sitting in class, unable to read, thinking I was stupid. I think about the letter Dr. Osborne sent to my grandfather. Your grandson's conditions are highly treatable. Children who receive early intervention go on to succeed in college and careers. Without it, he faces a lifetime of struggle. She was right. I did face a lifetime of struggle, but I survived. And now, 40 to 50 kids per year won't have to struggle the same way. That feels like the right use of my grandfather's money. Not what he intended, not what he would have wanted, but right nonetheless. Last month, Donald Voss Jr. called me. He's retiring, shutting down his firm. He wanted to tell me personally. I've been following the foundation, he said, reading about the kids you help. It's good work. Thank you. My son, he continued, the one with dyslexia and ADHD. He's finishing law school now, top third of his class. He's planning to specialize in disability rights. That's great. I told him your story, about the trust, your grandfather, my father's role in denying the appeals. He was angry, said my father should have found a way to help you, regardless of the trust terms. He's probably right. Your father was doing his job, I said, following the legal requirements. I'm not saying it was right, but I understand why he made those choices. You're more generous than most people would be. I'm not generous. I'm just tired of being angry. We talked for a few more minutes. He promised to make a donation to the foundation, said his son might reach out, might want to do some pro bono work helping families fight insurance denials. After we hung up, I sat in my office looking at the photos on my wall. Kids who'd been helped by the foundation, smiling faces, award certificates, progress reports, evidence that early intervention works, that proper treatment changes lives. My life could have been different, should have been different, if my grandfather had been less rigid, if the trustee had been more flexible, if my parents had made different choices, but it wasn't. And dwelling on what could have been doesn't help anyone. So instead, I focus on what is, on the kids I can help now, on making sure no 7-year-old has to sit in class thinking they're stupid when they're actually just struggling with a treatable condition. That's my grandfather's legacy now. Not the $1 million he left to build character through struggle, but the foundation that uses his money to prevent other children from struggling the way I did. I think he'd hate that, which makes it even better. It's been 8 years since I found the first folder, 7 years since I gained access to the trust. The foundation has helped 423 kids now. We've expanded to include more conditions: autism spectrum disorder, sensory processing issues, various learning disabilities, whatever kids need and families can't afford. I got married last year to someone I met at the university. She teaches English as a second language, works with immigrant families. She understands struggle, understands barriers, understands that people need help sometimes, and that's okay. We're talking about kids, maybe, someday. It's terrifying, the idea of being someone's parent, of making the right choices, providing the right support, of not repeating my parents' mistakes, but I have something they didn't: resources, knowledge, a network of specialists, and most importantly, I understand that asking for help isn't weakness, that treatment isn't coddling, that medication isn't taking the easy way out. My parents came to the wedding, sat in the back, didn't make a fuss. My dad cried during the ceremony. Afterward, he hugged me and said, "You turned out better than you should have, better than we deserved." I turned out how I always could have, I corrected. If I'd gotten help sooner, he nodded, accepted that truth. The foundation keeps growing. We're training teachers now, hosting workshops on recognizing learning disabilities early. We're pushing for policy changes, lobbying for insurance companies to cover comprehensive evaluations. We're trying to change the system that failed me. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven my grandfather, if I've let go of the anger. The answer is complicated. I'm not angry at a dead man anymore. That's exhausting and pointless. But I'm angry at the system that allowed him to trap that money. Angry at the cultural attitudes that dismiss learning disabilities as character flaws. Angry at every parent who hears their child is struggling and responds with, "Try harder," instead of, "Let's get you help." That anger is useful. It fuels the foundation, drives my teaching, pushes me to help more kids every year. As for forgiveness, I don't think that's the right word. I've accepted what happened, integrated it into my story, used it to help others. But forgiveness implies it was okay, understandable, excusable. It wasn't. A 7-year-old needed help. Adults failed him. Some because they didn't believe learning disabilities were real. Some because they couldn't afford treatment and were too proud to admit it. Some because they followed the letter of the law instead of its spirit. All of them were wrong, and that child suffered for 15 years because of their choices. I was that child. I suffered. I survived. And now I make sure other children don't have to. That's not forgiveness. It's transformation. Taking something terrible and making it meaningful. My grandfather's money was meant to build character through struggle. Instead, it's building futures through support. It's funding treatment, purchasing testing, training teachers, changing policies. It's doing everything he thought was weakness, everything he tried to prevent. And every kid who learns to read because of the foundation, every teenager who graduates high school because they got help early, every family that doesn't have to choose between treatment and rent, they're all living proof that my grandfather was wrong. Struggling doesn't build character. Support builds character. Treatment builds character. Believing in people and giving them the tools they need, that builds character. I learned that despite my grandfather, despite the trust, despite everything designed to make me fail. And now I'm teaching it to everyone I meet. That's the real legacy of the trust, not the money itself, but what happened to someone who was told he didn't deserve help, who got it anyway, and who decided to spend his life making sure others got it too. My grandfather wanted to create a man who succeeded without excuses. Instead, he created someone who fights to remove the barriers that create the need for excuses in the first place. I'll take that outcome, even if it came at the cost of my childhood, even if the path was longer and harder than it should have been. Because now, every kid we help gets the childhood I didn't have, gets to feel smart instead of stupid, gets to succeed instead of struggle. That's worth something. Maybe not worth what it cost, but worth continuing to fight for. The folder sits in my office still. Sometimes I open it, read the letters, the appeals, the cold rejections. Remember what it felt like to discover I wasn't broken, just unsupported. Then I close it and go back to work, because there are kids out there right now, sitting in classrooms thinking they're stupid, thinking they're lazy, thinking they're failures, and they're not. They're just waiting for someone to see them, to believe them, to help them. I'm that someone now. because nobody was that someone for me when I was 7. That's the end of the story. The trust that was meant to punish weakness now fights to support strength. The money that was trapped by cruelty now flows to kindness. The legacy of a man who believed in struggling alone now funds a foundation built on helping together. My grandfather got the last word in his life, but I got the last word on his legacy, and my word is better.